Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for another great webinar. We're proud to host here at Oasis Solutions, Supply Chains Under Stress. We're talking about best practices today for turbulent times with our friends from NETSTOCK and Sage Inventory Advisor, Russ Graff. My name is Aaron Rosenberg. I'm pleased to be your host today and to get started here. As I've led Oasis's business development team for the past 5+ years and really want to help our clients and some of the folks on the call today as prospects as well, manage best practices, bring subject matter expertise to the table around inventory control in a crazy time and a crazy year that will disrupt everybody's forecast going forward. So if you're using 2020 as a way to plan for 2021, you're probably going to need a little bit of help. And that's just what we are trying to do today as a partner for businesses around the country. Oasis Solutions is a partner here with NETSTOCK and Sage Inventory Advisor. We've been in the value-added reseller space, helping customers select, implement, and support their core business management systems for almost 30 years. As a service company, we focus really first and foremost, and our differentiator is our focus on the people and the processes behind the solutions that we implement and support. Because at the end of the day, you still have a large amount of the data that's being put into your ERP system happening between the chair and the keyboard. And we want to implement and emphasize best practices on people and process to help you leverage the products that you use to manage and run your business as efficiently as possible and get you the best return on your investment. And we're very thankful to have some recent accolades that are displayed here. We're a best place to work. That's really important to us because we know that if we have happy consultants, happy employees, we have happy customers. We're also a fast growth company. A lot of that growth has happened with our customer base for our NetSuite affiliation and bringing solutions like NETSTOCK and Sage Inventory Advisor to the table. Finally, Bob Scott has a top 100 value-added resellers list, and we're really proud to be a part of that and have been on that list for about a decade now running. So just a little bit more about Oasis, as some of you are longtime customers and some of you joined today may have, this might be your first introductory to Oasis. We do support clients all across the US. We again focus on people and process first. Putting a belief in who you buy from in the marketplace today is often even more important than what you buy. So you need the right people and processes on your team. You need a good partner with the right people and processes on our team to help you manage a successful project. We've got really talented, experienced consultants who bring their expertise around accounting, inventory, manufacturing, service environments, retail, e-tail, et cetera. And we have CPAs on staff, but we don't practice public accounting, tax, and audits just because we understand and know business. We also look for folks to bring onto our team that have been on the implementation side of the project too. So we have some former controllers, CFOs who have been through ERP implementations and can help really relate their experiences to our customers and understand that when you take on projects like that, it's a large undertaking and you already have very busy family lives and work lives. And so we want to make sure that we can manage that project according to plan, set the right expectations, and have a successful, referenceable clients. And we've got over 350 years of combined experience on staff doing just that. But really, enough about me and Oasis today. We'd be happy to answer any questions about our services after the webinar. Also, just to do some quick housekeeping as I introduce our subject matter expert, Russ Graff. Q&A box down here is where we'll help to gather questions. We'll hold those until the end of the presentation. If you have any technical questions or difficulties or anything like that, we'll try to answer those as we go too. But please use that question and answer box. We want to have questions. We want to answer your questions. We want to help you in your business. We want you all to help each other. So I'm sure if you have a question, somebody else probably does too. At the end of the presentation today, We will bundle all this up into a nice email, send you a sample copy of the recording as well as the deck so you can share with other individuals in your organization or around your network. So be sure to look out for that tomorrow morning as well. And so thanks again for joining us today. Thanks, Russ, for bringing your team and your knowledge to the table. Russ has been in the ERP business for decades now. He's worked on 1,000+ ERP implementations, has designed and developed a great product that brings a lot of value to the ERP tools that your company probably uses today or might be looking to invest in. Working with manufacturers, distributors, retailers. And so really, really happy to have Russ here on the call today and joining us. So Russ, with that, I will let you take it away and have a fun time.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all of our attendees, whether you're listening live or maybe catching a recording of this later. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day to have this conversation. We have been talking about turbulent times, and here we are on the day after the election, which I guess is election week by the time we get all the decisions made. So certainly turbulent is probably a good description for our times. So thanks again for the opportunity. Obviously, in terms of supply chain and inventory management and replenishment topics and so forth, these have been very disruptive times with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll talk about some of what that means and how we react to that. But I also think it makes sense for us to put this in a little bit of context. And that is, while this is obviously an extreme disruption is a normal state for supply chains, right? There's always something going on that creates challenges and disruption, volatility that anybody that lives in the supply chain knows very well. It's kind of the nature of the beast. And so as an example, even during so-called normal times, right, pre-COVID, and hopefully again, post-COVID, whenever we get there, there will still be disruptions that occur. In fact, just before COVID hit, we were already, many of our businesses were already dealing with tariffs and trade war activity and changes and impacts as a result of those things, looking for alternative vendors and so forth. Lots going on there. Certainly, we're always subject to potential for natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, et cetera. If your organizations were bringing any product in from the Gulf Coast this year, Houston or New Orleans or ports like that, that we've had 4 serious hurricanes hit shore, and looks like maybe a 5th one is now about to form and make its way to us. So unprecedented disruption from that standpoint. We also run into, of course, things like labor strikes and political unrest, unfortunately, sometimes terrorist activity. If you had any product coming out of Lebanon earlier this year when their port blew up, you lost product and lost time. So there's always stuff going on. And there's also even scheduled things like we know about Chinese New Year and having to manage that in our buying decisions and timing. We know that if you're buying product from Europe, that in August, things slow down because a lot of Europe goes on holiday. So there are unscheduled disruptions, there are scheduled disruptions. It's normal life, right? It's life in the supply chain. So we want to certainly have that context, but clearly this has been a major disruption. And it's exposed some things, but even in those normal times, we really want to have an approach towards what we would call a best practices model. And Aaron, I really like the approach that you described earlier in terms of how Oasis looks at this environment of being a consultant to business and really focusing on people and processes, because we think the same way, right? This slide deck was not built because of what you said earlier. This is the way we think about this, and it makes sense. Because in a best practices environment, these things don't exist in an island. These are not silos. They need to work together. So if I have the right people doing the right things, using the right tools, I'm going to have much better odds of achieving the goals that I have for my organization, hitting my profitability goals, my client retention, my employee retention, as you talked about. All that stuff plays together and works together. So even in normal times, this is the way we want to be thinking about these things. In the case of an extreme disruption like we've had now, I think it presents an opportunity. We have an opportunity to ask ourselves some good questions and reflect and analyze and understand, how did we respond to this? How did our systems respond to this, right? And think of systems in kind of that broader sense. One of the reasons that our governments put us through some economic lockdowns early in the pandemic was because they wanted to, we kept hearing the phrase flatten the curve, right? So what did flatten the curve mean? It meant reduce the incidence of disease so that our hospital systems, our medical systems could react and respond to the need. That if everybody got sick all at the same time, those systems would break and we would lose lives, and it would have been a mess. It would have been a disaster. Not that it hasn't already been a huge challenge, obviously, but that was the point of quote unquote flattening the curve, right? It's because that system was fragile and could break if the stress became too much. I spent 30 plus years in the desert in Phoenix when I was a firm similar to Oasis, where I was a reselling value added partner for Sage and some other products. And I know that when summer hit, if your air conditioning system wasn't up to the demand, you were going to have trouble. And so what does everybody do in the spring, right? Is they make sure that everything's up to speed, everything's lubricated, up to date, the Freon's in and all that stuff, so that my systems were ready for the stress. And so that's really what we've seen here is in our supply chains, they've been stressed more than maybe they ever have, more volatility than we've ever had to manage at one time. And so now we can ask ourselves the questions, how did we do? And how are we still doing, right? Because this thing isn't over yet. It's kind of, we got surges and spikes and ups and downs that we're dealing with. So how are we managing? How are our people and our processes and our technology managing this process? And if we come out of this without a better understanding of how to improve, then we've missed a real opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to come out of this better than we went into it if we're smart, right? If we're thinking about this the right way, if we're taking the time to reflect and get it kind of above the fray and think about, what does this mean for our organization going forward? And one of the ways that we like to think about it is in terms of different time frames. When we first launched, and we had shut down and the reaction and the shock of everything that went on with COVID-19 in late February, early March, and so forth. We had that initial reaction. We had to kind of figure out how do I, okay, I'm shutting things down. I can't get supplies. My demand just fell through the floor. Or in the case of some medical suppliers and other businesses, my demand went through the roof, right? So huge adjustments. What was that initial shock like? And just, it was a survival mode, right? It was just a natural approach to doing things. Then we sort of adjusted, right? We got into this medium term, which we might still be in. We might be now in our second or third spike, depending on what region you're in, depending on where you buy product from. If you're buying product from overseas or what ports you're coming in from, again, you may have adjusted and got to normal, right? China and its supply chain has really normalized quite a bit. But if I'm buying stuff from South America, Brazil in particular, or from India, places like that, I might still be just now facing some of the worst of that challenge. So these timeframes might be different for different organizations and or for within an organization, different product lines, depending on where those are being sourced. But it's good to think of it. It's I think a reasonable framework to think of in terms of these timeframes. And so in that medium term, hopefully made some adjustments, figured out, survived that initial shock, and now where am I? And now as we get into hopefully soon a post-COVID environment, I'm starting to see that phrase out there already in different content and presentations that are being done. That might be a little premature, but again, depends on where you are. What does that long term look like? As Aaron, as you suggested, if I'm planning 2021 based on what's happened in 2020, I might be at risk because this was so unusual. How do I understand what happened? How do I make adjustments accordingly so that my forecasts and expectations for 2021 somehow accommodate the unusual nature of what was going on in the year prior or the 6 months prior and so forth, and how it relates to my suppliers and my customers. So think about it in those terms of those different time frames as well. And I think that has value. And then beyond all that, then just so, again, questioning, asking yourself, so how are we managing things, right? How did we do? What are our standard processes for addressing replenishment? What's going on with our transportation networks? Again, even before COVID hit, we know that over the last couple couple of years, transportation costs and availability were really changing, and the challenge was increasing dramatically. And it already started somewhat of a trend in many organizations, many businesses, and certain markets and products to begin that nearshoring or home shoring, getting products back into the U.S. or near it. Central America, Mexico was already seeing a surge, and partly, and in great part, that was because of the volatility in the transportation networks and the increasing costs there. So depending on the nature of the product, you might be making those decisions, have already been making those decisions, and now that's been accelerated. So, what is going on there? Do I have a handle on what my options are? Maybe understanding different ports of entry and so forth. And then, and then internally, how are my ERP applications, whether it's Sage or NetSuite, whatever it may be, and a related technology around that, how are they helping me address these issues? So lots of internal reflection that needs to go on, and assessment as to how we're dealing with it. And of course, when we're talking with customers and prospects, and by the way, we now have over 1,600 companies around the globe using the application. We ourselves are a global company. So we've got customers all over, but more than half of those, almost 900 of those, are in North America. We certainly see a mix of different technologies in place. Everybody, of course, has a solid ERP or accounting software typically. So that's kind of the foundational piece. But we see lots of third-party add-ons as well. Might be a warehouse management application and barcoding tools and so forth. It might be an automated shipping solution that we've bolted on to the ERP and accounting, so forth. So different ecosystem ISV type players, independent software that gets bolted onto those environments. And then, of course, Excel is always in play, right? We use it a lot in the financial environments. We may be using a CRM, Salesforce type system, or Sage CRM type application, for our sales forecasting and marketing automation and so forth. But we may also be using spreadsheets as part of the function there. So we see Excel certainly as always a player in the mix. And this is my third call and second presentation, so I've got a beverage here to keep my whistle wet, so bear with me as I take a few pauses for that. So, again, lots of different tools potentially in place, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Before I do, I just want to create one more point of context here, and that's the difference between inventory control and inventory replenishment. We often use the phrase inventory management as sort of a catch-all, kind of a generic phrase. And when we say inventory management, often what we think of is really the physical management of the product, right? Pick, pack, ship, receiving product, moving it around in the warehouses, maybe bin control and warehouse functionality, doing physical counts, hopefully cycle counts of our more important items and so forth. And so that's a key aspect of inventory management, but it's not the only aspect. And it's really what we would call inventory control, managing that physical product. And again, this is one of those areas where we often see a third-party add-on, bolt-on product for warehouse management, or WMS as it's often referred to, or barcode type capabilities with handheld devices where I'm capturing transactions very timely and accurately out on the shop floor or out in the warehouse, right? So I've got really good data that's really timely and accurate. Critically important, I've got to know how much I have and where it is, and all those things, right? So that's one key piece of it, but it's not the only piece. And again, sometimes that's all we think of when we hear the phrase inventory management. But the reality is that there's a flip side to that coin, a second component, which is what we would call inventory replenishment, maybe inventory optimization. Sometimes you'll hear about forecasting and demand planning, and all those things kind of play into this second aspect of replenishment, which is really, now that I understand what I have and how much I have and where it is, asking the question, is it the right stuff? Do I have the right product in the right place at the right time to meet my requirements, whether those are manufacturing requirements or customer demand as orders come in and so forth. And so this is the side of the equation that addresses that demand forecasting, helps you place optimal or ideal purchase orders quickly with good information, good analytics behind it. And if done right, really exposes to me which items need my attention the most. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But, helping me understand where to focus my energy, where are things I need to be expedited and have some urgency so that I'm spending my time in the right place at the right time. So those two aspects together, obviously hand in glove, right? I got to know how much I have, but once I do, I ask that next question, and that helps me get the right amounts of what I have. Those things work really in sync to produce an optimal inventory. And I think it's worth thinking through, what are the challenges in the organization if I haven't achieved that optimal level, right? What problems does that present, and what does it cost me in my organization? And so we think of it in terms of three key things. There might be a fourth kind of out there in the periphery of this. But the key one is clearly stockouts or running out of product, right? The worst thing that can happen to me is that I run out of product, either in a manufacturing environment that causes me to slow down or shut down a production process. That's death, or it's very costly, or in a distribution or retail environment, if I can't fulfill a customer order, I can't complete that sale. I may not only lose that sale and the resulting profit of that, but I may also harm my customer sat and experience there. I may lose that customer altogether if they go find a competitor, can get their needs met, and maybe have a better experience and so forth. So really terrible to run out, right? And that tends to be the focus of most demand planning and purchasing folks, to solve that problem. But the issue is I can't solve that problem by simply overbuying, by buying too much product, because having excess inventory, excess stock, is also a real challenge. It's a little bit more of a silent killer, right? It kills profitability. And I really have to understand the impacts of that. So we have to strike that balance in an appropriate way. If I have too much inventory, I've got a couple of things going on. Key thing is it's tying up cash. And especially in small, medium-sized businesses, which typically is our target, and folks that are in the Sage and the NetSuite space and so forth, that's kind of how we define middle market type organizations. Cash is always king. Cash flow is always important. And so we simply cannot afford to have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars of dollar bills, $10,000 bills stacked in a warehouse gathering dust. That's money that I need elsewhere in the organization to drive other profit generating activities, whether that's hiring people, expanding my warehouse, doing more marketing, product development, all kinds of things that are on a long list, no doubt, for every one of us, that we would love to do if we had more cash. Well, you have more cash, it's just tied up. It's not liquid. It's tied up in excess inventory. And so that's a real problem. And secondly, that excess inventory actually has carrying costs, hard costs associated with it. So it's not only an opportunity cost, a missed opportunity to do things with it. I'm actually paying insurance and taxes and taking up warehouse space and labor costs to move it around and count it, potential for obsolescence or damage, and therefore shrinkage in that inventory value and write-offs at the end of the year. We've all gone through that. So there are really hard out-of-pocket costs, like writing a check, like flushing money down a toilet every single month, every single year. So lots of downside to having too much. And so I have that balancing act, right? Sometimes competing interests there. And the lucky folks in our organizations that get to manage those, that to create that balance, are the buyers and planners in our organizations. And so they have a very challenging job. They've got two really challenging environments that are competing against each other. It's very stressful because I've typically got sales folks and production folks yelling at them for running out or running low on product. And then I've got accounting types or C-level folks that are looking at a balance sheet and saying, you got way too much inventory, cut 10% or some arbitrary number like that, right? And now I'm stuck in the middle trying to figure out, how do I resolve those two things, and how do I maintain my productivity and end up putting out fires and running around, like with the old phrase, chicken with your head cut off type environment. This is a very stressful job and very challenging, and it's dynamic, and it never goes away. Every day is a new adventure. And one of the things that bugs me a little bit, to be honest with you, again, I've been in this space a long time, and those financial folks that are complaining, we give them all kinds of great tools, right? They've got a great general ledger. They've got great financial reporting, budgeting tools, spreadsheets, all kinds of other fancy analytics, dashboards that we give them. And then the sales guys that are yelling at me, we give them CRM systems and marketing automation tools and all kinds of other technology to help them sell, right? We get them LinkedIn and all these other tools to help them go find markets and go penetrate and build relationships. And then the person in the organization that's managing your most important asset, maybe second to your people, but you're on the balance sheet, sometimes the most valuable asset, your inventory, which is core to your business. We say, hey, here's a spreadsheet, go figure it out. And so it's really tough on those folks, and they could be doing so much more that's of a higher productivity value, right? Managing those relationships with those vendors, working on those transportation costs that they see rising, and building relationships and looking at alternative approaches for bringing product in from overseas, identifying alternate suppliers coming through different ports or in different environments, different cost points and so forth, different time zones and geographies. There's so much of high value stuff that those folks can be doing for us. And if we don't ever give them the time because we haven't given them proper tools, their productivity really suffers and it impacts the organization. That's a profit hit. And that fourth thing that I mentioned, it's kind of just out there surrounding all this, is just really the concept of visibility, right? Do I really have access to understanding the nature of the health of my organization from an inventory perspective? One of the things about ERP applications is they've got all these tables and files of data, right? 10, 12, 15 different files and tables out there that store all these transactions in a very organized way, right? Does a great job of segregating that, identifying it's all normalized. I know exactly what things are called and how it's all laid out and so forth. That's great, but it's in all these different places. Aggregating that data and turning it into actionable information can be really challenging. And that's why, BI tools, business intelligence tools, have become really prevalent in the last few years for all kinds of uses. And so let's think in terms of a BI tool for inventory health, right? How can I get all that disparate data from all those different tables into one place, aggregate that, and help me understand what's going on? So clearly, managing this critical asset called inventory is really important. It's, in that initial shock period, understanding that helped us stay afloat. So in difficult times, it's survival mode again. But even in normal times and in good times, it's how do I manage it to an optimal level? And trying to do that with just gut feel is asking for trouble. And if nothing else, this volatile environment has exposed the risk there. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit more about some specific best practices for demand planning. And again, remember that framework, right? People, processes, and technology. So how can we think about those different aspects from a best practices perspective? And so we actually, I host a podcast of sorts, I guess you'd call it. A supply chain chat is what we call it, where I interview different folks. Sometimes it's other third-party players like warehouse management solutions and shipping folks and so forth. Different publishers of software talk about their functionality and where we fit. But as COVID hit, we really focused on reaching out to some thought leaders and consultants in the supply chain space, where I interviewed them and talked to them about some of the things that they were seeing, what recommendations they were making to their customers, et cetera. And a lot of that focused on the people and process stuff. And it was very interesting. If you hit our website and go to our blog site there, you'll see some of these recordings out on our YouTube channel, so forth. And so a couple of things emerged from that I thought were pertinent. And one was this concept that inventory policy, that the way that I want my inventory to behave, what targets I have and what metrics I use to measure success and so forth, don't operate in an island. They're not isolated in some silo. They really need to reflect corporate policy, and that's a kind of a top-down view there, right? What is my corporate expectation? How do we go to market, right? Is our vision and our message to the market that we're going to turn around orders within an hour, same day delivery, or is it all about having the biggest selection of inventory of any of my competitors, or am I focused on certain specific target markets that are hard to find, SKUs that I solve? What is that overall view, and then how does that drive my inventory policy as a result, and what those expectations and metrics are? one of the things that we've heard a lot from middle market firms that has always really been the case in bigger enterprises is that these planners, these demand planning organizations and teams within organizations now have the quote unquote the seat at the table, right? One of the things that was exposed here and that companies and organizations have learned is that these planners need to have a seat at the table. They need to be part of the process of corporate strategy, so that my inventory reflects that corporate strategy. So I think that's a key point and something that we're seeing a real shift in middle market firms. The second thing that's come up real consistently is just overall communications up and down the supply chain, right? So the closer you are to your suppliers and to your customers, the better you're going to be able to react to any challenges that come up and volatility and adjustments and disruptions that occur. And not only that, but maybe taking it a step further, and some of your key suppliers, do I have a relationship with their suppliers? Do I understand what they're dealing with so that I can be a good customer to them, right? Or your customers' customers. How can I understand my customer needs better by understanding what their demands are from their customers, so that we're all in communication here and we're understanding that we're all part of the chain, right? Supply chain. So both upstream and downstream increase that level of communication and have those relationships in place, so that when the challenge comes, that I can rely on those, right? That I'm a known entity and that we've got a good visibility to what's going on upstream and downstream. So that's been a key issue. The ability to make rapid adjustments and bulk adjustments to our forecast now, and again, thinking in terms of these short-term, medium-term, long-term timeframes that I referenced earlier, right? Do I have the ability to be nimble and really respond quickly to these dramatic changes that are going on and see what that means downstream? So that's been a key factor that agility has been really key. The concept of identifying alternative suppliers has come up often. And so as we see certain regions deal with the pandemic and maybe shut down my supply chain from there, have I had alternative suppliers in other regions of the world that maybe I could rely on? And not only have I had them in place, do they know who I am? Right? Do I know who they are? Do I know how to place an order and be efficient and effective, so that when I have to rely on that secondary relationship, is it ready to go? Or am I just going to take a spot in line with 100 other folks that are now all of a sudden needing the attention of this supplier? Excuse me. So it's really makes sense, and the feedback we've gotten a lot is that maybe once or twice a year you should buy a few things from those alternative suppliers, even if it's a little more costly or a little less convenient, but just to grease the skids, to keep that relationship there, so that if you need to really rely on it, again, it's ready to go and you can flip that switch and make that shift. So not only identifying, but building those relationships and actually utilizing some of those suppliers along the way is a strategy that has presented itself here. And then the last thing I would mention here is really from a process standpoint is this item classification and focus, being able to really identify the nature of the items in your inventory, classify them from different perspectives. Which ones are now discontinued that I don't need to do any planning around, but I still might have some in stock, but just I'm working through that till they're gone. Maybe which items are on my catalog that I sell, but I don't necessarily stock. I've got vendor managed inventory there, or I've got relationships in place where I can quickly get access to those, or I use a drop ship environment. So identify those, and then which ones I really do need to stock and have a reason for it. And we've rationalized that decision. So now, and I look further at those and I identify, how much profit do they contribute to my organization, right? Rank them in ABC analysis in terms of value to the organization and profitability. And then from another perspective, how quickly do those move, right? What's the velocity of those items, and rank them in that way. And then combine those views and slice and dice that data to really understand the nature of the items in your inventory, so that, again, you can create focus and energy where it needs to be and where it's going to have the biggest impact on the profitability of the organization and the results that you're achieving. So, so a couple of critical best practices items there. And of course, you know, we here at NETSTOCK and Sage Inventory Advisor, we're a technology company. So, you know, think about the tech side of this as well, right? So again, we talked about the ERP and accounting software environments. We talked about those third-party add-ons. And then what we find is that most businesses are really stuck in the Excel world for demand planning and replenishment. They've got all this raw data sitting in the ERP application, again, in all those different disparate tables and files. And so they're working through, they've built a process whereby they extract that data and dump it into a big monster spreadsheet and build all these complex formulas. And that's my tool for doing replenishment. And we see that as a real challenge. If you've seen us at any events, you may have seen us with buttons on that's, you know, have hashtag ditch the spreadsheets, because we see that as a real limiting factor for organizations trying to drive the most profitability and get a best practices approach out of their inventory management. And there are real challenges. We've done whole webinars just on the fallacies and the challenges of using a spreadsheet. We've got a series of blog posts, and I think we even built a little ebook around just this topic. So I won't beat it to death here for time purposes as well, but real challenges, right? The accuracy of that, the timing of the extraction of the data, who's in control of that? Is that one person? Is that a risk factor in my organization? There's only one guy or gal that knows how to even grab the data and understand the formulas and the spreadsheets and the recommendations that are being made there. How do we know there's no errors, right? There's lots of surveys out there that describe 80% of most business spreadsheets have errors in, and these are very complex spreadsheets, so the odds are really high that there's errors in there that you may not even know about. And then there's the fact that there's probably additional external inputs that need to be part of that decision-making process that don't even exist in the ERP. And even if you thought you had it nailed, it's a dynamic environment. It's constantly changing. There's new processes, new SKUs, new bills of materials, new suppliers, new warehouses, all kinds of things going on that constantly are changing, new versions of the software that might be in play. So I'm always having to manage and adapt that. And so again, we see these buyers and planners becoming, you know, Excel jockeys instead of really doing what they really want to do, which is manage the chain, work with their relationships with their vendors and so forth. So there's just so many complications around this that it's better than nothing. It's probably, and no doubt it was, people were building these spreadsheets for good reason because it was better than what they were doing. But we would argue that now it's time to take it to a next level, right? That was great. And I know folks put a lot of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into building these things, but they've hit a ceiling, and it's time to look at a better practice than that, right? And we know that because those firms that we talk to, and again, 90% of our new implementations that we're doing, we're replacing spreadsheets. So we know that. And the reason that we're doing it is because they hadn't solved the problem. They still are running out of product, and while they still have excess of other product. And again, the buyers and planners are not seeing an effective tool that's giving them time to do what they really want to be doing and have a better quality of life as well. So, so first think about where your ERP stands, right? Different ERPs have different capabilities. And so you want to understand what can you get out of that ERP in terms of its reorder points and order reports and so forth. How well does it track lead time? Again, as a former reselling partner, I know that when we would implement a new ERP system, we would spend many hours building that new master file database of the items, and we would put in our reorder points and our mins and maxes and our EOQs and our vendors and our lead times, and work really hard on all that, making sure that was as good as we could get it. And then guarantee you within 3 months or 6 months or so, some time frame, most of that data was now obsolete because the world had changed. And it tends to not ever get changed in the ERP because doing so was a major manual process. Or at best, I dumped it out to a spreadsheet again, made my changes, wrote some macros, and then imported it back in. And that was a major effort in the process. So how often did I do that? Once a year, once every 6 months? If my experience was almost never. So the fact is now I had all this data in the ERP that wasn't doing me any good. It wasn't accurate anymore. So think about that and what your ERP system itself is capable of, and then what I need to add to that in terms of my ability to really improve my replenishment cycles and processes so that we can get to where we want to get to, which is creating optimal orders, right? If I want optimized inventory, which could be defined as having the minimum amount of inventory to meet the maximum level of service level fulfillment to my customers. In other words, having enough but not too much. If I want to get to that point, it's really based on buying smarter. I got to have an ability to create proper, smart, timely purchase orders that accommodate all the different factors, right? That give me the visibility that I need to do that, understand my supplier performance and lead time levels, that understand the dynamic nature of my demands and have good forecasts, that understand what my target fill rates are, how I can minimize the excess and so forth. Those safety stock levels, the concept of a buffer stock, which is not excess, right? It's the buffer for risk. I've got risk in my supply chain on both sides. I've got a supplier that's creating risk, and I've got a customer demand that's creating risk. And that buffer stock has to be intelligent and based on that thinking and understanding of what those risks are. That creates my buffer. Anything above that is excess. And so really need to do some good analytics there. And so, so there are tools out there. Obviously, we believe ours is one of them that can address these things. And you'll know when you've got the right tool because it solves the problem, right? It checks those boxes. But we also know that there can be a right technology that isn't necessarily appropriate for your organization. It may be that implementation is too difficult, it's too hard to use, too hard to get up and running. It may be that it's too expensive, it's just not cost effective, right? I have to do an ROI value calculation there. Say, okay, if I spend X, am I going to get a return of 2X or 5X, or what am I looking for there? And then there's also the whole issue of change management, right? The whole team has to be on the same page. It needs to have a top-down executive level endorsement that says this is the direction we're going. We've all bought into it, and it's got to be bought in and utilized and understood from the bottom up, from the the people on the ground, right? And it's got to be a tool now that can facilitate the level of communication amongst all the different players. When I talked about that seat at the table, here's management, here's sales, here's inventory, here's operations. Now we're all on the same page, and we've got a common set of facts and analytics where we can now make some decisions together. And if we do that right and get through that change management process together, it can be a huge game changer in our organizations. But we also understand change management is not easy. So, and I think that's a great use for the folks at Oasis, right? As you heard about earlier, that's one of their areas of expertise. It's what they focused on. They have experienced people on their team that have been through this in the real world, have helped other companies work through it. And so it's just a great resource for all of you as customers of Oasis to leverage them in this regard, in this part of the project, right? Help them understand your needs, help them dig in with a little bit and ask those tough questions and really think it through with you so that you get the right tool in place. Because if you do that, you're going to drive more profit out of your inventory. Between our team and the Oasis team, just decades of experience, the four founders of NETSTOCK. And just for point of clarification, so NETSTOCK is the company, and in the non-Sage world, we're known as NETSTOCK as a product application. In the Sage world, we're actually known as Sage Inventory Advisor, but it's the same application from the same team. So you may hear us kind of interchange those two terms. But the team that built the application at NETSTOCK, decades worth of experience in large organizations, multinational corporations with very complex supply chains, very customized and expensive environments that we worked in. And when we built the NETSTOCK Sage Inventory Advisor application, it was really understanding who our target was: small, medium-sized businesses that have folks are wearing multiple hats. They may not even be a dedicated job in their organization to do the planning stuff. They've got limited time. They need to be given a tool that's easy to use, easy to deploy, understandable, and gets to the nut of the matter quickly. So that's what we've built here in terms of an application. So we've built a cloud-based app in the cloud for the cloud right from the get-go 10 years ago. And the product has matured over time and stayed current with that technology. So it's a browser-based application, right? On demand, anytime, anywhere, any browser. I can have access to that dashboard that shows me what's going on. Built-in integration automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. All those challenges with the spreadsheet data syncing and accuracy, it's all done automatically in a matter of minutes. Every single night, I grab all that data that I need, and it gets all aggregated and all the analytics done against it, all the number crunching gets done, and it all comes back as actionable information in a dashboard that's graphical, colorful, interactive, lots of visual cues, really easy to understand, easy to get access to immediately, but then also the ability to kind of peel away the onion over time as I get more involved and want to get deeper in. Just a lot of ability to to really dive deep and understand what's going on in the app and the tool. And it really provides that management by exception. It does that classification, and it says, hey, here's the most important items that you need to focus on right now. We all know time is our biggest constraint, right? And if I've got 2 or 3 hours today to solve some problems in my inventory, help me understand which are the 3 or 4 or 5 items that I can tackle today that I have time for that are going to have the biggest impact on my profitability. So leverages that concept, and all these best practices are supported. And then finally, because of the cloud model, it's deployed remotely and quickly. And so, we're as a company, we've always been a remote virtual organization. So we had we didn't have to adapt to that work from home environment. The product has always been deployed remotely and very quickly, and it's affordable subscription pricing. So it really fits that middle market requirement. And so before we open it up for some Q&A, and again, please take advantage of the dialog box and the interface within Zoom here to do that. I just thought I would show you a couple of quick screenshots rather than go into a live demo. More than happy to have a further conversation with you, of course, and learn more about your organizations, et cetera. But just to give you a feel, this is an example of 6 of the 9 widgets that are on our standard dashboard. The top row tends to be more stock oriented, looking at what's my current inventory stock holding and how does that compare to my ideal model, and how am I doing over time. That bar chart there is looking at the last 12 periods, which could be days, weeks, or months, and I can see the trend. How am I trending? Am I going in the right direction or the wrong direction? I get the overall view that I can see how many items are in each of these different categories, and I can drill into that. But then I also give you what we call our top 5 list that says, here are the top 5 SKUs that are contributing the most to that particular condition. So whether that's excess stock, I know I've got $9.5 million worth of excess there across some 2,500 items, but here's the top 5 that are contributing over $500,000 worth of my problem just in these 5 items. Let me see if I can take some action there and start working on those and solving those. Again, focusing my time and energy where it's going to have the biggest impact. The second row tends to be more customer oriented, right? How am I doing in terms of my fill rate and my targets that I'm achieving there, and how's that trending over time? Where am I currently stocked out that's causing me a fill rate problem and potential lost sales? What does that analytic look like? And again, drill in ability to see that macro view or just focus on my top 5. And then that last column is a little bit more forward thinking, this concept of surplus orders in the upper right. These are purchase orders that I already have issued that when they arrive are going to contribute more to my excess stock problem. I've ordered too much or too soon, and I'm just going to have a bigger problem. So maybe I can get ahead of that and delay that purchase order, cancel it altogether, whatever it might be. Secondly, on the bottom, conversely, on the stock outside, these are products that we call potential stockouts. They still have them on hand. They're not showing up as out of stock yet, but we're anticipating, based on supplier performance and demand forecasts for these items, that we're likely to run out of these items before the next replenishment arrives. So maybe I can get ahead of the curve again, expedite some of those items, make sure I've got POs issued on those items and so forth. And you see all kinds of other visual cues and color coding going on there, which is very helpful, again, to help me drive my decision making and prioritization. And that's based on item classification. And let me go back to this screen. So we can really drill into, again, understanding which items are most profitable, which ones move the most quickest. And so therefore, what are my bread and butter items that are color coded in green? Focus on those guys to make sure that I take action. This is an example of our order entry environment, purchase order environment. So we do some analytics and we present, basically says, okay, for this supplier, NETSTOCK is telling me here's everything that I need to order from that supplier today, either as part of a standard normal replenishment or because something happened. I sold more than I thought, had more demand than I anticipated, so I better get an order placed. And so by warehouse, by item, by supplier, I can see what each of these recommendations are. Very easy for me as a buyer or planner to look at the recommendation, understand why it was made. All the detail is there, all the understanding, all the analytics. I can look at other locations. Everything's there at my fingertips, and I can accept or reject that recommendation. Typically, I'm saying, yep, that looks good. Yep, that looks good. Oh, I know something that the system didn't know because we just signed a big contract with Costco, so I'm going to need more of that, right? So I take that recommendation and increase the buy or whatever. And once I get it the way I want in this kind of workspace, very easy to manage, click a button and it goes and creates the open PO for me back in the in the ERP application. And this is what I was going to reference earlier, the concept of classifying your items. Here's our analysis that we do in the matrix that we produce that, again, lends itself to the color coding. Out of the box, it uses the 80-20 rule, but I have overrides and parameters and configurations that we can do to make this apply really nicely to your organization or to certain product lines or certain warehouses that might need to be tweaked. So out of the box, straightforward, ready to go, get value right away, but a lot of ability to continue to enhance and configure. And then the last screen we'll talk about here before we open it up, kind of a view of a forecasting screen from a kind of a bottom up. We're looking at an individual item within a warehouse. We can see what the prior history looks like. We'll go back, 5 years worth. Obviously, it's weighted more on more recent activity. I can look at seasonal patterns. So we see that consumption history over the last 20 plus months here in this example. And then I have the ability to test that against all of our algorithms. We've got 15 or 16 very sophisticated algorithms. We test each one, see which one would have produced the best fitting match or result. And then we use that algorithm to predict the next 12 months worth of demand with an ability to override and amend those, right? So here's a computer generated forecast, but now I've got external information from the marketplace, from my sales team, whatever's going on as a result of disruption in my supply chain or my demand environment. I can make those adjustments very quickly and now see if that impacts my buying decisions and what I need to do. And again, you'll notice I won't get into the detail here, but all kinds of color coding and graphics and tools at your fingertips as a user to make you really effective and efficient with that. So just kind of a quick glimpse there of what some of the screens look like. Again, we'd be happy to schedule what we would call a free inventory health check to understand your situation, your environment. Reach out to Aaron and let him know if you'd like to do that. And we'd be more than happy to coordinate that. We know Aaron really well and his team. We have a lot of respect for them as a group. And we know that they would be a great resource and a partner in helping us figure this out for you. And we would appreciate that opportunity. So I think with that, you've got that contact information there. Let's open it up, Aaron, if you want to come back in and see if we've got some questions that we can address in the minutes that we have remaining here.
Yeah, Russ, great. Thanks so much for all the amazing content and insights and barely taking a breath, man. You're just a machine as far as your knowledge is concerned, and also, for the great shout out to us. So one of the questions that was posed was just looking for maybe some more specific experiences that you could share with us, maybe a client recently that you've helped during the pandemic that's seen a big shift in their requirements for supply chain management. Maybe that's a customer that did really well. Some customers are really thriving, and the problem is that they can't keep up with the demand as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah, I can think of a few situations, and we've had lots of conversations and all variety of impacts, right, that you could imagine. Actually, just recently, we did a presentation to a trade association called the Outdoor Industry Association. So typically companies that are, selling camping gear and related items like that. and we did a presentation with one of our clients, a company called Traeger Grills. I'm sure many of your customers and you are very familiar with Traeger smokers, right? And on the surface, you wouldn't necessarily think that would be impacted somehow by COVID, but we shut down, restaurants shut down, people were eating at home, and all of a sudden, sales skyrocketed for smokers for Traeger grills. And
Sure, right.
right. And then on top of that, after a few months of lockdown, people were seeing that, hey, this thing's going to linger for a while. We're going to have an ongoing challenge here for a little bit. I'm going camping. Right. So I'm heading out into the wilderness. I can socially distance really well out in the woods or out on a river with my tent or my kayak. And so now those organizations had an initial shock, and then all of a sudden saw demand increase dramatically. And so making those bulk adjustments to forecasts, shortening replenishment cycles so that they could buy more quickly, maybe a little less efficiently, maybe a little more cost associated, but more replenishment cycles allowed me to be more nimble and react quickly to different events that were going on. So some of those were the kinds of things that we were working with some of those clients and that Traeger relied on. And just to see that visibility and be able to be that agile was really a big game changer for them.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I have not invested in a Traeger, but I've been very tempted as well, as I also was grilling from home during this crisis. Another one is, this, we talked a lot about our large customer base in distribution manufacturing, but what are you seeing for e-commerce? Have you seen any growth or explosion in kind of people also looking to kind of revolutionize the way that they're meeting their customers in digital space?
Absolutely, 100%. And so now, it may not have changed the overall macro demand, but it changed the way that they were getting that demand and then fulfilling that, right? So, even in the case of grocery stores and retail environments in general, not even e-commerce, think about pet food suppliers. We've got a number of those, and where instead of customers going to PetSmart and places like that to make a specific run to the store to get pet materials, they were buying more pet food at the grocery store. They were making that major effort to put on the mask and go stand in line and all that stuff. They weren't going to go make multiple stops. They were buying everything from the grocery store. So now all of a sudden, total demand didn't change, but where the demand was coming from shifted dramatically. And so we saw that in the e-commerce environment as well. And there's no question that e-commerce has absolutely boomed. I've been buying wine online lately. I don't know if anybody else has joined a wine club, but I'd much rather do that now than go to Bevmo and stand in line. So the convenience factor of that was really incredible. So huge impact on e-commerce.
Yeah, we've seen that with our customer base too. So we want to help everybody on the webinar today. Again, you'll get a recording of this tomorrow in your inbox along with the slides. Reach out to me. Here's my email address and my extension at the office that rings on my cell as well, so we can get you your free inventory health check. I think it would probably take Russ, about an hour of their time to get them a grade there. Everybody wants a health check here in the COVID time, so get your inventory a health check as well. Make sure that we can keep you healthy and sane and productive during this crisis and this election, like you said, week. Hopefully it's a week and not a month, but
hopefully.
Regardless, things must go on. Inventory must be replenished. Customers must be serviced. And Russ, again, thank you for you and your team and giving us all your time and expertise here today. We appreciate it, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.